Now, for more on this, we're now joined in our Port Elizabeth studio by Professor Simphiwe Sesanti from UNISA's Institute for African Renaissance Studies. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, 40 years later, how should Steve Biko truly be remembered?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me. One of the things that we need to understand fully about Bantu Biko was that the most powerful statement he left for us was that the Western world may have made wonders in creating industrial and military outlook, but the greatest gift is yet to come from Africa, giving the world a humane face. Now, we need to interrogate that 40 years later, after Biko has joined the world of the ancestors, what he actually meant by that. And very briefly, I would like to say that one of the atrocities that were inflicted by the European world upon the African people was that they sought to do two things that left, a very deep damage. The first one was to dehumanize African people. In dehumanizing them, then they, took away the values of humanity, the values of self-respect, the values of self-love, the values of self-esteem, and they replaced all that with a sense of self-despising. But they did not end there. They also de-Africanized the African people in the sense that the African people lost their cultural values. Now, whenever you discuss cultural values, people tend to think or reduce cultural values to dance and music. But cultural values are much more than that. Culture is about our philosophies, is our political systems, our economic systems. So Bantu Biko, in speaking about self-rediscovery, was proposing to us that when we were dehumanized, we are supposed to be rehumanizing ourselves. Now that we have been de-Africanized, we are supposed to re-Africanize our own selves. And in the process, not only are we going to restore to our own selves a sense of humanity, but we are also going to rehumanize the inhumane people that subjected the African people to all the humiliating conditions. So that to me is the most important factor in the struggle forward 40 years after Biko joined the world of the ancestors.
Now, Prof, I want to unpack what you've said a little further, where just yesterday we heard Azapo calling on the nation to remember Biko and what he stood for. Are we doing that, just beyond commemorating his life? What else can we do or should we be doing?
The great Stephen Bantu Biko was not merely a sloganeer. He did not only speak about theory. He combined theory with practice. So when you look at his trail, you will see that in King Williamstown, there were many projects, self-helping projects that were initiated by black people, because Bantu Biko was trying to instill in the sense of, the minds of the black people that they must at all times exercise a sense of self-reliance. Now, for one reason or the other, when we had the kind of freedom that we had in South Africa, the political parties at all times, sought to promise what they were going to do for the black people. That is why today black people, African people, are more about demanding what needs to be done instead of, reclaiming and re-empowering the African people in giving them a sense that they just need a space where they are going to be able to do things for themselves. So, these kinds of promises have helped to disempower African people more and to empower the elite in our society so that they see themselves as the saviors of the African people, with whom the ordinary people cannot do anything. So therefore, 40 years later, what we need, when in true homage to Bantu Biko, we need to be reclaiming the message that Bantu Biko gave, and that is, of empowering people in the sense that they are going to be placed in a position where they can do things for themselves. As we would have the call that, we are our own, ordinary people must understand that they are their own liberators, that their freedom is in their own hands, not the elite who think that they are doing the people a favor, who yesterday were amongst the ranks of the poor and who were empowered themselves and became enriched in the process. And in the process of being enriched after being poor, they then look upon the ordinary people and begin to despise and to treat them with contempt.
Now, speaking of reclaiming that message, the Black consciousness movement has in many ways evolved. Is this a good thing for the cause? Let's talk about its relevance in South Africa today.
There is no question that, for as long as there are racists in the world, all over the world, if you look at the Americas, especially if you consider the time when Barack Obama, a black man, was in power, it was as if, Barack Obama was being shown the middle finger, where black people are being brutalized in spite of having, a black president in that part of the world. When you consider all over the world, black people continue to be despised, they continue to be subjugated, they continue to be brutalized, they continue, to be treated as if black lives do not matter. So as long as that condition exists, then there is no doubt that the black consciousness philosophy remains potent and very important. And so then, that being the case, the question we're asking, we've got to understand that in the struggle for liberation, we were not engaging a war against the people that were folding their hands. So when they killed Bantu Biko on the 12th of September in 1977, they did not just stop there. They sought in his lifetime and after his passing to distort the message that he was giving. And there were many efforts to undermine, to liquidate, to destroy the formations that represented the black consciousness when they were banned and all that. So that effort, it is not by chance that today you see the black consciousness movement being reduced to a shadow of its former self. It is because those that were fighting against us had always made sure, if you study the history of Africa, you will see that whether it be in Ghana or the DRC or Zimbabwe, there were always those who worked on behalf of the enemy forces who infiltrated the liberation movement so that they can weaken. So the position that the black consciousness movement itself finds itself, the condition that the liberation movements find themselves, including, you see now, even the African National Congress is finding itself on the receiving end. It is, one of the organizations that remains standing. But there are all kinds of attempts and maneuvers to see to it, that the liberation movement across is being undermined. It is not an accident of history.
Now, Prof, something that I found interesting was what you mentioned earlier on about our cultural values and how that includes our philosophies, economy, and of course, politics. Now, one thing that I want us to look at is the link or the ties between politics and the black consciousness movement. Would you say that link is somehow broken or almost forgotten given what we see today?
No. As I was saying earlier on, you asked about two things. Let me begin with the last one and then go back to the first one. As I was saying, when I was pointing out to you that, it was after 9 years of, from 1957 to 1966, it was after Nkrumah was in power that he was overthrown, with the connivance of the forces from the West. It was hardly a year, it was 6 months after Petrus Lumumba was in power that he was overthrown. Now all these overthrowers were deliberate. So even then in South Africa, we must not have an illusion that the seeking of the liquidation of the liberation struggle only took place and ended in 1994. Those of us who were in the liberation struggle, who were determined would know that right up until 1994, the forces in the liberation movement were being recruited, to work for the enemy forces. And so it continues to be done thereafter. And that is why I'm saying that the weakness that you see now in all the liberation movements, be it the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the Black Consciousness Movement of Azania, the African National Congress, is not an accident of history. And going back then to the link about the question of culture, I just want to mention one important aspect about, you know, the meaning of family, which we need to resurrect and to revisit the African people. That, you know, in the African culture, family is not just about the nucleus family. When we speak about family, we are speaking about those that came before us, those who are living, and those that are yet to come. And the deep philosophical implication and teaching in this is that those who are living have a responsibility to learn the great teachings of humanity, the great teachings of compassion, the great teachings of, you know, a tendency against selflessness, so that those of us who are living, you know, are not slaves and subjects to greed that has captured and captivated many leaders of our country today, who have no sense of responsibility to those that are yet to come, who are devouring anything and everything that is in their path, without any sense of conscience. So therefore, it is these kinds of values, you know, that as African people we seek to rediscover, and the Bantu Biko, you know, were engaged and called upon us to rediscover. Because as you would see now, this sense of disrespect for human beings, where you see, you know, those who claim to be representing, you know, the ordinary people, and in fact are simply representing their stomachs, have no sense of respect, have no sense of compassion, have no sense of appreciation of the dignity of our children, you know, the African children who are the face of poverty. Had they any sense of conscience, any sense of being human, any sense of being African, they would know that this dehumanization of the African people, you know, should not be going on. But of course, you know, our responsibility is to understand that during the liberation struggle, even now and in future, you know, traitors will always be with us. We have to make peace with that. Imposters will always be with us. We have to make peace with that. But those of us who were inspired by Bantu Biko will continue to hold, you know, the flag high and call upon the African people to look upon the exemplary leadership of that son of Amagcina, that child of Amagcete, who lived, you know, for his people, who understood that when you allow yourself to be controlled by stomach politics, then you no longer belong to the people. You become a captive of the enemy.
Now, Prof, politically, this is a huge year for South Africa. Just looking at the ANC's leadership race ahead of the elective conference in December. Your views on that, and what leaders of today, perhaps specifically those in government, can take or learn from Biko's legacy and the value that can add to the people of South Africa?
When Bantu Biko moved on to the world of the ancestors, those of us who have read a bit of history know that, you know, he was on his way to speak to the leaders of the African National Congress, to the leaders of the Unity Movement, to the leaders of the Pan-Africanist Congress, to seek to build consensus and unity. It is not that Bantu Biko was naive or was blind to the political differences that existed. But Bantu Biko's position was that in spite and despite the differences that existed amongst and between the liberation movement, there was a need to have a consensus position. And I think those of us and those who are willing to learn anything from Bantu Biko, particularly the African National Congress, that is a leader that, you know, one of the things that, you know, could be learned is the sincerity. Because in the absence of sincerity and simply mouthing and sloganizing a quest for unity, we are not going to go very far. But it is up to them, really. You know, if you know, the leaders of the ANC are simply preoccupied with their own stomachs and the bags of money that they have, their children, it is their children's future. Their children's future that is being endangered, because those, you know, those millions that they have today are going to be blown into thin air like the leaves that fall from the trees during winter. And their children and their children's children will look back. You know, history does remember the good and the bad, and so they will be remembered. It is up to them, you know, to do the best that they can with sincerity, but it is up to them if they choose to pursue selfish interests. But one way or the other, history will remember them. If they do well, their children will benefit. But if they don't, their children will be punished by the legacy that they leave. So it's up to them.
Now, Prof, while I have you, let's talk about some of today's developments, particularly that court ruling against the ANC PEC. What does it mean for the ANC ahead of this crucial election in December?
It means a lot. Let me begin by saying that it is a tragedy that disputes in liberation movements have to be settled in courts. It is an indication of how we have lost the plot across, you know, the liberation movement territory. So, what does it then mean? As we heard today, the announcement, what the most likelihood, and they have indicated, is that they are going to appeal those that have lost, you know, the case. And so what it means, therefore, is that again, you know, the sense of realizing one, that you know, let us go back to the drawing board. Let us put aside our sense of arrogance and ego. And think, you know, you hear a lot, everyone says that let us put the interests of the people and the interests of the ANC. And this is said from platforms. But immediately when the leaders, you know, step away from platforms, all of them are busy, you know, agitating and mobilizing the people around themselves. And so you see this kind of inconsistency. So here we see that the battles are going to continue in court, and maybe perhaps people are hoping that come the December conference, issues will still be in court, and so the status quo remains. And so, you know, people are going to win by any means necessary. But if there is any lesson to learn, you know, it is that this winning by any means necessary does not help anyone, particularly, you know, the political parties, because if the people do not find a venue where they can articulate their frustrations and aspirations, they then begin to find an alternative by forming a political party elsewhere, and the divisions grow, you know, deeper and deeper and broader.
Now, Prof, we're running out of time, but I just quickly want to indulge one of our viewers who tweeted a question for you. His name is Nobazala Linda, and he says we should ask you to unpack Biko's quote, which is the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Can you just unpack that for us briefly, please?
Thank you very much. That's a very powerful one. Bantu Biko taught us that you know, for as long as you are mentally free, there is nothing that your enemy can do to you. Your enemy may shackle you, may physically oppress you, but you remain alive. You are not a slave until you respond to the call of being called a slave. But it also teaches us, you know, there is this great call about the quest for economic freedom. It tells us that anyone and everyone, you know, can acquire wealth, you can acquire economic power. We see that many, you know, amongst black people have economic power, but you see that, you know, they just carried on from where their oppressors have left, because they do not have a sense of mental liberation. But when you have a sense of mental liberation, you know that you know what is important is to serve those who are around you. Then you are a free human being, because you are not subject to material. So that is what Bantu Biko taught us, that when we have begun to define our own selves on our own terms, not to be defined by others, then we will be able to have a very clear sense of where we are coming from, where we are, and where we are going. So that's one aspect, just one aspect of that beautiful quote from the son of Amagcina, or Chopo, or Chopo, the son of Onengeza, Omamcete, or Puhoma, Master Makshi.
Prof. An insightful discussion. Thank you so much for a beautiful ending there. It was really lovely having you on SABC News. That was Professor Simphiwe Sesanti from UNISA's Institute for African Renaissance Studies joining us for a discussion on the life and legacy of Steve Bantu Biko. More news after the break. Don't go anywhere.